So at this point, I'd like to ask each of our panel participants, and thank you folks for joining us again, to introduce themselves, give you a little bit of a sense of why they're here, what their background is in information security, and what they'll be trying to impart in a way of some wisdom for us all today. So Alex, why don't you kick things off?
Sure. So I'm from Los Alamos. This is actually the third time I've been here talking about cybersecurity, something that I've been involved at Los Alamos for 14 years now. I've had the dubious honor of being involved in everything bad that you've seen in the newspaper, and then also all the good things that never actually make the news regarding cybersecurity. So I've seen a strong evolution from generally in cybersecurity from something that you didn't ever see in the public view to the fact that BP lost a laptop with 14 or 13,000 people's social security numbers and information this morning on CNN. So it's literally becoming, I think, an everyday news topic at this point. So very interesting. I think the reason I'm here, I like to talk about cybersecurity. I like to work on it. I find it very frustrating. I think it's a very immature field. For even doing it for 14 years, every day it seems like we know less and less and have even worse solutions. And hopefully one of these days we'll start to mature a little bit as a field and get a little better at this stuff. I think what's going on, the cybersecurity world sort of makes these big changes every once in a while. We had one literally a few months ago with the WikiLeaks thing, not because WikiLeaks itself was so much cyber-oriented, but the resulting cyber community and hacker community that responded to that, with HB Gary deciding they're going to help out the government and find out who was initiating these WikiLeaks events, and the retaliation to HB Gary, and the subsequent sort of cascade of high-profile break-ins that have occurred over the last few weeks, from RSA to McAfee to I saw this morning the European Union Parliament just got broken into, and so things are changing again in the cyber world, and I think that's very interesting.
Hi, I'm Virginia Bedford. I'm Associate Director at the Arctic Region Supercomputing Center. This is my first HPCC meeting, and I really appreciate the opportunity to meet all of you and see what this group is all about. One of the ways that I initially got involved in cybersecurity was by necessity. Our center is and will be for at least the next couple months a resource for both the University of Alaska, but also the Department of Defense High Performance Computing Modernization Program. And as the only center within that program that provided open research capabilities, and also the only center that didn't have a direct line of command with a military organization, we always felt the challenge for meeting the requirements, which we absolutely had to do, of the DoD, while still maintaining a usable and useful environment. And I think George is also in that group, and I know that we both have talked about this a bit, but the view of the educational environment by many of the agencies is as the big hole. And so we didn't want to be that. So over the years, we've gone through many reviews and such, and I had to educate myself, and I actually found this to be a very interesting field as well as an important one. The need to be compliant, the need to provide useful HPC resources, the need to work with vendors to make sure that new solutions and operating systems were effective and didn't break things has been fascinating. Lots of work with people and systems and technology, and so it's been great. And by the way, my husband works for BP. I'm getting a little anxious about that laptop you just mentioned was stolen. I wonder if that was him. So anyway, that's me.
Gosh, you all are so erudite. I'm not sure I remember what the question is now.
Who are you?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm George Moncrief, and I work at the Engineer Research and Development Center in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Reed Mosher gave a presentation yesterday. He's also here, and many of you know John West. We all work for the same organization. We do R&D for the Corps of Engineers and for the DoD. I work in the Information Technology Lab and started in what the Army calls information assurance, but really is information security to most of the world. About 12 or 15 years ago, on a contract that didn't even have a position for information security. Back in the day before security was really kind of a vogue term, back before it was a hated term, back in the day when we really didn't keep much of that kind of thing in mind. These days I'm a information security guy who hopefully has enough view of the enterprise to understand the things that really matter. I spend a lot of my time now telling people how they should do things and really not what they can't do, which is a big differentiation, I guess, probably will make as this talk goes on. A lot of you will know your security people as the men and women who come around and say, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't use your iPhone on our network, for example, or your iPad, you can't use your iTunes, you can't do a lot of things. And my role now is more of a person who tries to understand why that matters and what we can do in a way that we can enable technology to help us to solve our problems.
So you're saying it's not true that information security people don't say that?
Oh, absolutely, it's true that we say that. It's a point of pride for some people, I regret to say.
Well, maybe like Alex said, it's a part of being immature.
I think it's a maturing. People who are new to information security think that they have to help everyone establish the boundaries, and I think that through some of the knocks and the pain that I have endured over the time that I've been in this field, I've learned that it's really important to help people get their job done more so than I ever really appreciated. That's an important twist for information security, right? Because you want to take the balanced approach to everything that we do. HPC is all about having a system that has high performance CPUs, high performance interconnects, high performance storage, so that throughput through the system is maximized. You want to balance all the components. And information security as part of the enterprise is a key technology in doing that. And you also have to achieve a certain level of balance with that. And when you begin to do that, you learn about the rules and the what we call boundary conditions in mathematics and physics, and that's really not what's important.
Okay, very good. Thanks everyone. Let's quickly recap kind of what we were looking to do when we established this panel from the abstract. You know, the thought is, as we're moving into this world, it's getting more and more complex. We've got cloud computing, which a lot of people are trying to deal with. We've, barely getting to the point of sustained petaflops, if you will, on a grand scale, and looking down the road, everyone's starting to stress out about arriving at exascale. How can we possibly maintain any adequate security levels? Is there one place to start looking or start working to address these issues? Let me ask the audience first off, how many of you in your roles have anything to do with information security? Show of hands. How many of you have anything to do at all with information security? So, don't you think everybody in this room should raise their hands? Do you think we all have something to do with information security? Whether it's on our own systems and how we watch them, managing credit cards and finances, down to the information security at our own installations, and just being diligent about the kinds of things that we do and how we use those systems. True, it may not be part of your role or your responsibility, but we're all really involved. Certainly, we're all affected by it if information security is breached and strikes out, and we happen to be at the wrong end of that strike. I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is just from yesterday. Yes. NASA audit, warning of catastrophic consequences from lax information security. Maybe it's a little bit out of proportion, but I think what this is doing is indicating to us the sensitive nature of fear and fear around information security. Have any of you had a chance to look at this, and would you like to comment on it?
So Unfortunately, this year we don't have a auditor on the panel, which would help moderate my derogatory auditor-type comments. So, because I think being a cybersecurity auditor is a very easy job. You can always find the problem, and frankly, this is a little bit, you know. And I also joke that I think all of the departments on the cabinet and the federal government that each have an inspector general, and they all get together and write their template for their annual cybersecurity audit, or whenever they need a little extra attention that they're doing a good job, and they throw out one of these, because DOE had one of these last year. NASA's turn is right now. So the reality is, yes, there's problems. NASA has lots of problems. Pick your favorite department or agency in the government. They have lots of problems. Pick your favorite company. They have lots of problems in cyberspace. I think, again, I go back to, RSA, supposedly a good company, McAfee, a good company. They sell a product, right, that protects websites from getting hacked into, and they had multiple websites get hacked into. So either they were not using their own product, or, well, maybe the product doesn't quite do what the salesman said. So the point is that there, cybersecurity, lots of issues. You can provide a report that says that. I think the unfortunate thing is that this will get lots of attention. Unfortunately, I said this earlier, the real thing that will happen as a result of this is a bunch of poor NASA scientists and users will find their productivity going down with their computing systems. That's probably the end result, not necessarily an improvement of security at the end of the day. And hopefully, with auditors, with the rest of us, all of us, that instead of doing this sort of thing, we're looking actually towards better solutions. And hopefully we're getting there soon and slowly. Every time I see one of these, it just makes me cringe, because I don't think it's the solution. I think it just adds hype to a problem that we already understand is a problem.
I have just a slightly different view of it. As someone who's been through an audit every year for the last 12 years, they've really varied in quality, from the lousy ones that are just pointing out nitty details that make us look bad, to some that have been really effective in helping identify holes that the system administrators do the best they can. You develop your processes the best they can, and there's still some things that pop out. I did look at the report today, and it looked like the main recommendation really was that they put in place a security review and oversight program, as well as, of course, identifying a couple of nits like you were talking about, specific systems that had unpatched systems and passwords that could be cracked. But hopefully, this is the way that we're doing business with these audits, and then the press gets it, and then people react. We have to change that, and we have to do that through education of all the people involved and support for the people that are trying to fix the problem. So I'm supporting you a little bit in your comment, but the role of the auditor, I think a good auditor is much more complex, and if they can work with the team and understand the issues, what are the root causes? They're typically process related. That people who need to do the job aren't getting the support they need to make sure that those systems are in good shape, not only in responding but also in the initial design. A lot of times that's where problems lie.
George, you want to add anything to that?
At the late stage of my life now, I'm more interested in solutions than I am in problems. Unfortunately, this report is about problems, and it's not the first that NASA has had. I'd like to see something a little bit more constructive, because all of you here use a network, and every single network that you're connected to has some problem somewhere. There's a computer that's not patched. There's a firewall with a hole in it. There may even be an attacker in one of your computers somewhere. And we all know that, right? Even if the auditors come to your site and they say, you look great, they didn't find everything. And that's just the reality of it. Our jobs never end, right? Just like the people who are managing the petascale computers now, we're going to exascale. After exascale, it's some other prefix that I'm not familiar with. Our jobs never end, and we're always struggling to keep up with the changes in technology. And I think that a better approach would be, this is what NASA is doing to try and maintain the integrity of their systems.
So let me ask folks in the audience, if you have any awareness of what your organization is doing today to rethink security issues around, a world that we've created for ourselves that has this ubiquitous broadband wireless access with so many places, other than perhaps maybe like the DoD or some highly regulated agencies, people are continually in and out beyond the firewalls using their cell phones and their smart devices and their iPads and so forth. Are any of you aware of any new recent additions to security controls at your organizations, at your companies? Nobody?
The reissuance of the Just Say No policy?
Well, let me ask then, what are you doing at your organizations, folks, as far as what's new? What's the latest thing that's happened? And what kind of an impact is all the the new wireless access having with the topic of security?
Do you want to go first? Yeah, please.
What's new? Well, one of the things that we talked about this a little bit earlier this afternoon too, is the desire for folks to make use of some really cool things that are happening, like iPads, iPhones, and that related kinds of applications. And so how can we integrate these? People want to actually log in through them and log into other systems using them. We have issues of encryption of data on these systems. Those are, and maybe I should back up just a second. One of the things that, when we're doing security, and I bring up something like encryption, it only matters if it matters. Is it a requirement? Is it something that you need for all kinds of reasons? To protect information, to protect confidentiality of information. If you don't need it, then those are things that maybe that's a problem that doesn't need to be solved. In our world, because we have requirements for some sensitive information, it is a problem that needs to be solved. So this is new technology that's coming out, and the vendors may be a little bit late in solving it, but some of them are. Like today, we were just discussing encryption on iPhones and whether or not it was actually certified encryption. So this is one new thing. I was actually also going to ask, maybe a question for the audience next would be, what can't you do that you want to do? What is it that the security people aren't letting you do? But before that, maybe Alex and George have some comments about what's new in their areas.
So to talk about the mobile devices and cloud, I actually think this is an opportunity where cloud computing is going to improve security. I think that what we have the opportunity with ubiquitously connected devices is that we don't actually have to put all of the information on all of these devices out there. The cloud allows us to just give snapshots of information out to these end devices. And in fact, those of you who use like an Android phone or the Google apps on other phones will notice that it only sends just enough information to read the current email or even part of the email. And if you lose connectivity like the T-Mobile service in this room is a little shaky, at least up here towards the front. I was having a little trouble reading my email earlier with my Google apps, so from a user standpoint that was kind of frustrating, but it actually reaffirms that there's good security there and the fact that there's just not a lot of information on the device if it was lost. So I see lots of opportunity to expand upon that sort of thought and say, well, it's really only small snapshots of data that could be lost on individual devices, and that's all because of the enablement of the cloud. So it's actually getting the security benefit out of the cloud out there in the field. So, and in fact, as we at Los Alamos, as we look at expanding the use of all these devices, we're looking at how do we leverage that. And in fact, we're using the kind of bank model, the analogy of, just like you don't spread your money all over the place, you put it in the bank, and the bank is good at protecting that, and you just take out what you need at any given time to use it. That's the same model that we're looking at with individual mobile devices.
So these are, two of the headlines that I saw, and I thought they would be interesting. You can read these: information and security concerns, new studies and so forth. How many of you believe this is real? There's concerns about security. Yeah, we all know that. So, well, these headlines are from 2005. nothing has really changed, has it? There's still concerns. I think it's evident that we will never be, and it was just said, we will never be in a world or an environment where people just take security for granted and believe it's all secure. When someone tells you it is all secure, you really need to wonder. So that's from 2005.
So
now here we are.
Can I make a comment? I didn't comment earlier. I don't think things are getting any worse than they were, though. Maybe it's fair to say that, right? Technology is diversifying. Data is becoming more distributed than it ever has been before. But arguably, conditions are no worse 6 years later now in 2011 than they were in 2005. So, you know, I've heard it said if you're not moving forward, you're going backward. And I would argue that 6 years from the headlines that you have on the screen there, we're in no worse shape than we were at that time. Maybe a little bit better because you're right, in information security we have this term, and it's called attack surface, right? And it's all the elements that are available for exploitation by someone who wants to attack you. And so, you know, if you have a network, you reduce your attack surface by closing open ports and shutting down computers that you aren't using and closing holes in your firewall so that there are fewer areas to attack. And right now, the proliferation of all of these handheld devices, whether they're iPads or Android phones or an internet cafe right down the street from you, the attack surface has increased significantly. But the number and types of exploits are no worse than they ever were. Now, you know, with a 500 gigabyte or a terabyte hard disk in my laptop, I can carry 200,000, 500,000 names and social security numbers and other types of personally identifying information on my laptop, whereas 5 or 6 years ago I couldn't carry that much information. So the loss can be a lot bigger per incident, but the number of incidents hasn't gone up.
Okay.
I would kind of agree with that, except for I'd say it's probably, I think the real difference now is the perception and awareness is higher, that it's probably not any worse. In fact, just the fact that we know today that BP lost that data, I think is actually a very interesting point, because I think 5 years ago that would have never gone public. That would have just happened and we would have never known about it.
And so I'll follow on to that with a comment that it's important to me that for those of you who have a mobile computing device, it's important that we become expert at using that. And part of information security is deploying the knowledge to be effective in the way that you use it, so that if you have your credit card information or your bank account information on your iPhone or your laptop or whatever your mobile device is, that you know how to protect that.
So one thing about this for the CFOs, part of what I'm sure they're worrying about is not just the potential of a vulnerability being exploited, but also the potential of a report like what came out from NASA. I mean, part of it is you need to be good, but you also have to look good. And I think, in my mind, if you have to pick one or the other, you need to be good, but you really need both. And this is the kind of thing I bet other leaders are thinking, other organizations, God, thank God it didn't happen to us, because it wouldn't take much to have that happen. So their worries that are expressed there may not be, the risk may not be a lot higher, but their consciousness has been raised. And so that's a good thing, as long as they recognize that it's not just about looking good. They have to be good too.
Well, and as the panelists know, what I did is I polled some of the folks in the community, friends, colleagues, asked them what kind of questions they thought would be interesting, what are they dealing with at their organizations, and we got into the topic of cloud computing naturally. So most of us are going to be impacted in some way by cloud computing if we're not already, even if we don't realize it, from online buying services to whatever. But let's think for a second of what this might mean, and let me put you guys on the spot and ask you, what are some of the security issues that people should be thinking about when their organizations go out and adopt some cloud computing infrastructure model?
Persistence of data.
Say again?
Persistence of data. You upload your photos to Google in your personal portal, your personal profile, and they're there forever. They never go away. Your email will always exist now. As long as there's a manufacturer of hard disks and network equipment, your photos, your email, whatever digital fingerprint you leave, it will always be there. And so as people who run for public office and celebrities have learned to their detriment that things they did in college seem to follow them, right? No longer now it's a photograph that somebody pulls out of a scrapbook that they had from college. It's a fingerprint that's been left behind that can be duplicated endlessly, is always present because the cloud always exists. And as I mentioned before, in attack surface, there's only about 1 million people reading email using the Google portal at any time, maybe 10 million. And if Google makes a single mistake and they expose that data, all those people have access to it. And it spreads like wildfire across the internet if it's really interesting to people. So persistence of data is a critical point.
Okay. Alex, what do you say?
I was just thinking about the email, and if you guys have seen the HP Gary emails, if you want to see some interesting, sort of like the Enron thing, all the HP Gary email that just got released by the anonymous group that hacked into HP Gary, they pulled all the emails out and put them on the internet. Yes, and the fact that when Google goes down for 30 minutes, that makes CNN. I think that's an interesting.
And the court order can't make it go away anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, even you look at Amazon Cloud Services, it's you fire up the virtual machine and it's and then you let it, you bring it down, and there's a scratch storage that you get with that, and where does that go to afterwards? You don't necessarily know or are not in control of that. And if you read the agreement that you have between Google and yourself, or Amazon and yourself, or your company, you will find that it in fact is pretty explicit on them not having any responsibility over your data. And that's your problem, what you're going to do with it. So those sorts of things I think are a big deal. I also think that really to make cloud computing successful, I mean, in the short term, what we're seeing is this differentiation between public cloud and private cloud, and we'll have our private cloud for important things, and we'll maybe use public cloud for certain things. And I think at sort of a macro scale, that's sufficient. We also have then the reality of people who just want to get work done, and one of the things mentioned earlier is you're starting to see people use Amazon for high performance computing today. I mean, actual real work that you would traditionally have loaded onto a cluster, you can now do with Amazon, because maybe you need exactly one run and you don't have access to the resources, and getting out the credit card and spending $5,000 with Amazon is a lot easier than any other high performance computing resource that you have access to, and that's good enough. And of course, from a security standpoint, well, what data did they just load on there? What did they process because of that convenience factor? So, we have to worry about that. I think in the long run, if cloud computing is going to be more ubiquitous, and whether it's high performance computing or general computing purposes, this evil concept of what we call data labeling is actually going to have to occur. The fact that we have to be able to differentiate between this set of information not being a big deal if it was ever released, and we'll do that on a public cloud and that sort of thing. But this piece of computation that we want to do is really core. It's part of our core IP algorithm, whatever. That's going to happen in the back room here with that one, with those core CPU cores or GPUs that we have here. But that other stuff we'll send out over there to do. And I listened to presentations about the future of computing, high performance computing, MPI. I can tell you there's no plans to do data labeling from a security standpoint. And so as long as that's the case, we're going to have to segregate at the macro level, and that's going to have, I think, some bad consequences for security, because you're going to have those users that just do the random thing. And it also means that we're just going to have this idea of public and private clouds.
So one of the things I was doing this afternoon, I noticed that NIST has developed a whole approach now. They want to put out one of their special publications on security and cloud, and I think we're already, I mentioned this to George, I think that we're already running a cloud. I think it's a community cloud, and I think it's running an infrastructure as service. They had several criteria for a cloud: on-demand, self-service, broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, and measured service. And when we think about this, well, from the user's perspective, I think that using the DoD resources that are part of our so-called family of systems is a cloud. But one of the things that it's not a public cloud, but it's a cloud. But when you get to the public clouds, and frankly, I think that these apply even at the level of our community cloud, they mentioned 4 major things. One was trust, multi-tenancy, encryption, and compliance. And one of the issues about exposure to data, not only initially but persistently, and then things related to compliance. So if you have to, if you're in an environment that requires meeting certain regulations, you have to have a cloud that supports you meeting those regulations. Within the modernization program, we have that, because you have control over the systems that you're taking care of, and there's a whole concept of risk governance and acceptance. When you start moving into a public cloud, that's one of the places that you lose that. But even with the email issue about things becoming accessible, from a user's perspective, they may see the fact that the email is not their very own, even in a sort of a semi-private area. There's system administrators that can see it. It's not totally protected from the user's perspective. Right. When you're the caretaker of a system, like I think some of us are, the Google Cloud seems scarier, but really some of those same characteristics, I think, can be true no matter what the level.
Used a good word in there, and that was trust. So this is what Gartner has to say about it. Biggest security concern with cloud computing is the issue of trust. So how do you know for certain that the key people who manage your data and applications on the cloud are completely trustworthy? It's getting down to a human factor in many respects. And who else besides you has access to that sensitive information? So does that mean that information security has gotten down to the point of the least common denominator, which is us, and it's how we use it and how we access it?
That's always been true. We learned that lesson. We don't learn that lesson actually over and over and over again, that we forget that it's really about people. People initiate events that have to be secured, if you will. Usually the destination of data that you create or information that you have is other people to make decisions that affect people. And you can't really take people out of the equation.
And so perhaps one of the things that we need to be aware of as our organizations are adopting cloud computing is more of an education process. So just what you guys have just echoed out was anything, once you put it out in the cloud, you might have to assume that it's gone public. Whether you have security around that cloud, whether you consider it a private cloud or not. Once the information's out there, as George said, it's out there forever. And who's to say that there won't be a breach of security, and that information will be made available to places where you don't want it to be made? So if that's the assumption, and that's the factor that we have to live by when we plan out our security, then it sounds like there has to be some really deep and far-reaching education process about all the people that are putting information on the systems.
So I think we need to start thinking about how we do this longer term. I've heard it said in other venues here that there are other countries, particularly Asian countries, that have like a 50 or 100-year view of what their future is. And I think that cloud computing is an immature technology, but the only way that we're going to make it really useful and productive for us is if we take a longer-term view of how we manage what we do with it. And I don't want to prevent either of you from saying anything. Please speak up. But
see, I'm worried I'm talking too much. So.
I'm just trying to think about security 100 years from now, and it's just too scary.
Yeah, I was thinking about, one of the things, every time we really get serious about cloud computing conversation, I keep thinking about, that quote from IBM, the famous quote that said, really, at the end of the day, we only need one computer for the country. Just one big Multics computer, we're good to go. And it's sort of, sometimes I think that's what we're, the fad of cloud computing is sort of trying to return that. And I think there's, I think cloud computing computing in the idea of, that your computation is not going to occur immediately local to you is going to persist, and that the fact that the economics of physical location, that the fact that you're close to power and connectivity are going to drive where computation occurs, that this is heresy for us at Los Alamos, that the idea of high performance computing at high elevation where power is really expensive maybe doesn't have a long-term 100-year future, that we're going to do it where it's there's lots of air to blow on computers and really cheap close power. And that sort of thing is going to drive aspects of what the cloud means, and the other thing that and this statement I like is the fact that I think it's more an intuitive thing for people to appreciate that there's security concerns in the cloud. And the fact that we're talking about those as a result of the cloud now, as it is an immature technology, I think that's a really good thing, because these same issues exist when we talk about your operating system vendor, your hardware supplier. I mean, it's just not as intuitive as the fact that they really sort of hold your security eggs in their basket. That if they do something wrong, if they screw up on the application, the core application that you're using, and introduce a security vulnerability, you're on the hook for that. And in some ways, that's exactly what we're talking about with the cloud here. It's just, I think, a little, we're talking about it up front instead of assuming that it's there, we just kind of brush it away, which we're doing with a lot of technologies today. So I'm glad that this is coming up, and I think it's a valuable, good discourse, and hopefully we'll have good solutions to it.
So let's go to another question here. So how do we provide secure cloud services in a world that's flooded with incredibly powerful smartphones? And does that even make a difference? Because the question comes up a lot in public forums that I'm at. The smartphones, are they really having an impact on how we have to build security?
Well, I think we touched on this earlier with the comments that I think this is an opportunity for success with clouds, because we can pull the computation and this data storage back into the cloud, where hopefully we have more centralized control. We have an understanding of what that means versus all the little tentacles of individual devices, and how do we control those? We can just provide the snapshots of data down there. I also think that's a little bit utopic in thought, because people want to have their data immediately available to them. Somebody mentioned earlier, the fact that we have gigahertz processors and multi-core sitting in our phones, and so you can do some pretty amazing processing in a smartphone these days. In fact, we recently compared, that there's more computation in some of these smartphones than in a Cray 1, which is pretty amazing. So, and along with that is the expectation that I have data to process. So that may, in fact, you could argue maybe we're just seeing a re-emergence of the whole PC thing again in just a different form, and that alone will kill the cloud, because everybody's going to want it right here, and this cloud concept means nothing. All we care about is our data in our hand.
So might it be possible, though, that the security issues should be dealt with here?
Well,
at the smartphone level versus at the cloud?
And that's one thought. The problem is that, again, it's the PC thing all over again. I can tell you, in any good administrator, whether it's high-performance computer and you have thousands of nodes, or you're an IT administrator for thousands of computers, you cannot patch every computer. Even with the best patch management system available, there's always the corner cases, and it only takes the one corner case to fail. And in fact, I love to say, right, a cyber defender and an IT guy, all you can do is not fail today. That's winning. You go home and say, God, nothing happened bad today. Thank God. Don't know about tomorrow.
So typically the security issues are related to the data storage and the computing capabilities. Like, we used to want to protect our HPC systems because we thought maybe someone's going to break in and try to use them to exploit something else. But the basics stand. Whether it's a phone or it's an HPC system, you have to look at the requirements for confidentiality, integrity, availability, authentication, and non-repudiation. Those are kind of the 5 tenets. I remembered the triad, and George reminded me of the other 2. But You know, when you think about, well, so what do you have on your phone? What are you doing with it? You know, what's on it? Is it your addresses? Is it your finances? Is it the special key that you need to access something else? You have to think about those things and protect accordingly.
So the issues are no different than any of the work that we do that goes behind a firewall today.
So they are a little different, in my opinion, and maybe this is a difference, not in kind, but I think of it in terms of survival. If your company, your business, has information that is critical to its survival, really critical to its survival, intellectual property, you might be ill-advised to put it in the cloud, because data that you encrypt today may not still be encrypted 10 years from now, because the technology has changed so much that what was effective 10 years ago is no longer effective today. And there are businesses whose real value lies in what they know and what they're capable of. RSA, many of you use the small RSA tokens for authentication, identification to your bank or to your computer or something like that. And RSA recently had an incident, but it came known to them, something called the Advanced Persistent Threat. And effectively what that is, it's a group of people who persistently try to gain your intellectual property. And they had to publicly acknowledge that they had lost some information. I think they might even still be trying to assess the extent of the damage. But they had corporate secrets, the algorithms that they use to generate the numbers on the key fob that you have, and some of that information is now gone. And when you put information in the cloud, Addison said earlier today, what happens if the cloud goes out of business? Right? Where does that information go? If they auction off the resources of that company and your data is on somebody's hard disk somewhere, and the company didn't take adequate protection, maybe they presented you with an interface that made it look like it was protected, but inside the cloud somewhere it wasn't, your data may be sacrificed. There are a lot of things, and if your corporate survival depends on protection, just like your body, your person, your family, it's better to keep it near and almost hands-on in the way that you're going to protect it. Because if it gets out of your reach, if it gets out of your control, the locus of your survival is also out of your control. And that's what I meant when I said earlier, you have to take a long-term approach, because now we have to think about what's going to happen in the future to the things that we consider most important. And often we don't. This distributed nature of the way that technology is changing really changes the way that we have to approach it.
So I guess part of me is disagreeing with you a little bit, because I think it depends upon the cloud. Because I've even been in organizations where the backups didn't work and the disks fail. And it may be that a cloud can do a better job, and if you have a appropriate service level agreement, those issues, you actually could do better in an environment like that. You actually could be safer.
You could be, if it doesn't matter long term that the data gets out.
Well,
if it's more important that it survive, then it stay private.
But I would say it could get, again, it depends on the kind of cloud. I mean, like a private or community cloud or a hybrid of some kind, but it could be that it could just, it can get out just as easily if it's sitting in your own organization.
That's true. All that's true. This is all about estimating risk, right? That's what security is all about, is what do you have, how important is it to you, and what do you have to do to protect it if it needs to be protected.
And again, you have those advantages of a cloud, of the ability to, a more of a focus, more flexible, more expandable.
That's right. Persistence of data can be a good thing as well as a bad thing.
Right. And even that persistence that we have concerns about in the big public, like Google Cloud, doesn't have to be, it's not necessarily inherently part of all clouds. I mean, if you have control and it is isolated and such, you still have the ability to destroy it.
That's right, and I would expect that actually to be a feature as cloud technology matures. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we have the ability to exert control over is the persistence and the effectiveness and the extent of exposure, the distribution of the data. Right there, FISMA says that if data is owned by a U.S. entity, it can't go outside the continental U.S. Right? There are other countries in the world, countries in Scandinavia, that have the same requirement. And so their clouds being built, that have the ability to guarantee via service level agreement that your data doesn't go outside the physical geographic boundaries of the country where it belongs. And that's an attribute that no one thought of, I think, when these clouds were first imagined and built, because Google, Amazon, Yahoo, you know, pick your large distributed company. It was only after they started to violate some of these requirements that it came to their attention that they had to do this. So
that's why I think that we're part of a cloud already, a community cloud. That stuff happens to people's data. The users don't really know what's going on, and they don't need to necessarily. But if you look at it from their view, it's just, you know, it could be as scary.
That's true. Yep.
Let's see if we have any questions from the audience at this point. Anybody?
Who here likes their security people?
Who here knows their security people?
The same hands that went up earlier.
Yeah, do you even know who your security person is?
All right, well, we can go a little bit deeper then with this next question. So, as we're preparing for exascale, right, topic of choice, you know, there's conversations, you know, and a few of the folks have had presentations that have hit on the evolutionary versus revolutionary. But as we take a look at the possibility of rebuilding architectures from the ground up, of completely re-architecting everything that we've done, whether we do or not, it's a possibility. But does this give us the opportunity, a much needed opportunity, to redesign or integrate a completely new generation of cybersecurity infrastructure?
Absolutely. Ideal time.
And should we?
Same answer. Absolutely. Whether or not we will, that's a different question. But you don't get a better opportunity, right? Technology, a revolution occurs, and then evolution occurs.
Yes.
And so when evolution occurs, it's really difficult to make design changes. And that's what we're talking about here. It's a design change. It's an early stage in the development cycle type of change that needs to occur. And revolutions are infrequent.
Yep. So now, are any of you on the panel following what's going on in terms of the new, potentially hot companies that are coming along in the land of information security? Do you see anything exciting that's on the horizon? Some new techniques, some new, brand new algorithms, some whole new approaches to you know, how we handle info security?
So a couple things there. One is, and I go back to my earlier comments, that I think some of these traditional companies and the fact that they're getting some high-profile compromises themselves will have an interesting effect on the economics and what comes out of companies here in the near future. I also think that, and it's along this line, and I find very fascinating, and I think it's really relevant to whether cybersecurity is going to change, how much it's going to get integrated, is the economics and how do economics play into it. You know, how do we value information as a society, or or even as an economy? How is that changing? How do we delineate that, and how does that justify costs or expenses that cybersecurity incurs versus how much it saves in terms of by protecting information? And so how those economics and how that aspect of cybersecurity is maturing, and the fact that you see some interesting discourses coming out about how do we analyze that sort of thing and make a determination, a rational decision about how much we spend on cybersecurity. And so I think a lot of that is in the near future going to drive changes in terms of what we see from a technology standpoint, what's acceptable to deploy, what's not acceptable to deploy, what risk we're willing to take. And you know, along that line, I think, and is this my botnet question rephrased?
No, I have that one actually.
Oh, okay. Because I think actually, and this is, you know, I think an interesting area, I think that we're starting to see an opportunity to learn from a very rapid and changing and innovating community, which is the hacking community. They, you know, are extremely effective in finding new vulnerabilities, figuring out how to use those vulnerabilities, building systems that are highly resistant and immune to our defensive measures, and I think that that's frankly becoming a very mature set of technologies coming out of that. And in fact, one of the things that I see here is we look at these botnets, and they're on the scales of millions of systems. I mean, there's multiple botnets that are on the scale of millions of systems out there, and the fact that I would make the statement, and we were talking about, wouldn't you just take all the PCs and you got an exascale computer? I would make the statement that the botnet operators are operating exascale systems today. If you take and doing it effectively, and doing it in the face of amazingly hostile conditions from their standpoint. You have all these security companies, all these IT operators, everybody trying to stamp them out, and yet they're able to. And there was one that they just took down this last week. It was generating on order of 40 billion spam emails a day out of the botnet. So I mean, just incredible amount of CPU computation to just generate that many spam emails, and the fact that they're doing that in these horrible conditions from their standpoint as an operator. I think there's an amazing set of technologies to look at there that could be applied to the large-scale computation systems that we're looking to deploy as we look forward. And whether it's the resilience of these things called distributed hash tables, and how those are able to deal with systems nodes in a system coming and going, and allowing you to randomly determine where you want computation to occur. And I know some guys at Argonne are looking at some of those sort of peer-to-peer technologies, and how they could be integrated even with MPI as a routing technique. I think is really cool. And so I think there's opportunities that you're seeing, that have traditionally been these horrible, evil things that the hackers are doing out there, to bring those around 360 degrees and turn them into highly useful technologies, even in just simple high-performance computing.
We're getting close to running out of time here, so let's wrap it up this way, and then we can hang around if anybody wants to ask any particular questions. But let's go one time through the panel, and just what would you like to send the folks home with in terms of what they, as individuals working in their organizations, not necessarily responsible for their information security, what should they be thinking about? What lessons should they take back to impart with their staffs? George, why don't you kick it off, and we'll come back down the line.
Well, you had to pick me, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the question is, what do they take back to their organization when they go back? Right, that's what it's kind of a closing word here. Well, I'd like to say that we are not the enemy, and I think that's probably a fair statement, but
we, the information security professionals.
The information security community, we are not the enemy. We are in fact often trying to help those of you who are the scientists and the developers to be as good as you can be at what you do. We're all trying to work together to accomplish really the same goal.
Okay.
But I think when you go back, one of the things that you should keep in mind is that the incentives are what really matter. The botnets that we were just talking about are principally run by organized crime, and organized crime is in business to make money, and so their incentives are different than those of us who work for the federal government and the academic community. We're not here to make a profit, whereas the people who are sending 40-50 billion spam emails a day are. And one of the lessons that I think we can learn out of that, one of the things that we need to learn from them, is that incentives matter. What are we trying to accomplish? What's the incentive to get the goal accomplished? And so I would say when you go back to your office, you have to assess what's really important to you and why. And I think that's the way that you need to think about information security.
Very good. Virginia, closing comments?
I would add that unfortunately, it is not possible that information security is completely transparent to you. You have to pay attention a little bit, and you have to be willing to educate yourself to some level. Hopefully, when you come back next time, you could maybe raise your hand and that you know who does security in your organization, and you've thought a little bit about how your role is with it. One of my interests is in usable security, and that means that you can get your job done, and it isn't just a no. George talked about this earlier too. But part of making it usable is the feedback from the people that are using the systems. You have to be part of that. And so just maybe raise your own consciousness a little bit.
Good advice. Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, I think everybody needs to be aware of it. I think everybody needs to complain about it a little bit more. I worry that we're sort of becoming complacent about the horrible situation of cybersecurity, and I think a little bit more complaining, productive complaining, is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think at the end of the day, the good security has to be easy security. It may require a certain amount of awareness, but it's also just got to be part of the process, and it's got to be intuitive, and it can't be some bizarre thing that we expect users to do. And we sort of touched on it with all this stuff, but I think one of the biggest issues with security right now at the end of the day, and it comes down to users and everything else, is our ability to convince a computer of who we are, that password, that RSA thing that you use, whatever it is. Our ability to authenticate with computers just doesn't work. And so that's, that almost at the end of the day, if you look at all of these security vulnerabilities, that's one of the biggest Achilles heels we have, is our ability to convince a computer that we are who we are doesn't work. And so it's a place we have to fix.
Great. Join me in thanking our panel members for their time today, please. Thanks, guys.